I think this might be the most trouble I've ever had naming anything. You'll understand why in a minute. But first, no, it's not a sponsor. I'm not that important yet. I need to acquaint you with perhaps my longest-running thought project ever, which I've elected to call Tiny Magic for reasons which, again, will be made readily apparent to you imminently. You see, among my many eclectic areas of fascination, one of the most long-standing has been with the concept of little people, big world, showcased in the likes of The Borrowers, Stuart Little, George Shrink, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, any and all stories centered around mice, etc. So, when I was a kid, one of my favorite solitary pastimes was sitting on the swing in my grandparents' front yard, imagining all of my Star Wars and G.I. Joe action figures having a mini-war in the field across the street. And being myself, I imagined how such a thing might actually, technologically be wrought. Of course, having a 10-year-old's comprehension of science and engineering, I could only carry this concept so far at the time. As such, it lay dormant for around or about a decade until I'd amassed sufficient knowledge and writing skill that I could codify the basics of a world in which the scant remnants of humanity maintain consciousness in flying matrix fortresses known, perhaps not super creatively, as a skybox, from which squads of 4 to 6 inch tall androids sally forth to explore this strange new world they inhabit, mostly to keep the humans from going completely insane. And for reasons I've long since given up on trying to understand, I then proceeded to throw little magic fairies into that mix as well, who incidentally had built their main capital upon the not-so-ruined remnants of an old-world battle tank for a bit of that good old magic versus science, nature versus technology thematic symmetry. But my self-awarded license to art notwithstanding, in light of how far technology and my knowledge of it have advanced from back in my day, I've decided to revisit this old attic concept with an adult's comprehension of the technological, logistical, socio-political, and economical aspects of building, maintaining, and of course warring with a miniature post-apocalyptic cyborg kingdom. And just so we don't have any confusion later on, or at least so I can't be blamed for it, a cyborg is a partially or fully mechanical being that had once been a biological organism, whereas an android is a purely artificial biomimetic being, meaning the latter is made to resemble a human but has never actually been in any way, shape, or form. First off the docket, in order for a semi-sentient robotic doll army to get off the ground, it needs 3 things: soldiers, vehicles, and at least one mind, though preferably several, to coordinate them so they don't act like NPCs or, actual stormtroopers and start banging into walls and blasting everything except what they're supposed to be aiming for. Proceeding roughly in that order, the first and most evident problem with trying to shrink the human form down to rodent size is the excessive energy requirements for our brain power. In short, with our existing technology, there simply isn't enough room in a mouse-sized skull for a human-level brain. And even if there was, you'd need the power cell out of a Jedi's lightsaber in order to keep it running for longer than the lifespan of a mayfly at a praying mantis convention. However, the world has changed significantly since my youth. Many advancements in miniaturized power and data storage, computing power, sensory tech, robotics, material sciences, and now AI have all breathed new life into my old childhood passion project. Now, with our conceptual baseline firmly drawn, I present for your viewing pleasure my oldest and most long-suffering idea's crowning jewel, the Pilot Knights. Originally, I was going to call them pilot lamps or lights or something of that nature. But in the end, I figured people would be more inclined to use something that sounded more regal and less utilitarian. My essential thought process for their construction went something like this. Take a 4 to 6 inch action figure, add smartphone components, camera, mic, sensors, processor, etc., then fit it all over a metal skeleton with AMF fibers and give it a detachable power brick for a backpack. And as you can see, since they aren't hampered by their human pilot's biological form, so long as they're able to wrap their heads around its motor controls, the only limiting factor is, as it nearly always is with these things, the battery. Though by outsourcing the PK's agency to an external mainframe, and just leaving the basic motor and maintenance routines up to an onboard AI model, we'd reduce the system's overall power requirements considerably. But even so, asking a human intelligence to pilot a thing so utterly divorced from the Homo sapien body plan might be more trouble than its novelty factor may be worth. But I suppose that'd be a matter for those future souls to discern for themselves. That said, the main advantage of building on this scale, and the reason I chose to add it to my pile of mech-related lore and content, is that it's where AMFs would shine most radiantly. What with their not having to cope with the stresses of large mechanical motions or the demands of commercial, industrial, or military requirements, but having the power, flexibility, and scalability to be easily adapted to fill almost any role a Rodentide army could ask of them. For example, see this mock-up of a helical rotor I created using AMF cords in lieu of an electric motor. Granted, they would likely trade speed for torque, but think of the advantage of having a flight gear that weighs a tenth of what it did before. Although I'll freely admit this is just a last-minute tack-on idea, so feel free to eviscerate it down in the comments section. In light of this whole delirious symphony, you can probably all imagine my joy at discovering that someone had gone and produced a huge RC Star Destroyer at nearly the same scale I'd imagined as fielding my mini Stormtrooper battalions as a kid. So, in that same spirit, the second stage of my fantasy adventure pageant is essentially an RC conversion of the old toy Star Wars vehicles, things like the Clone Turbo Tank, ATT, MTT, and so forth, into the PK's Micro-Armored Support Division. And in that same vein, the question you might have reasonably been asking from the start is, just what sorts of weapons would things less than a foot tall be expected to use? It's not like we can make guns that small, at least not any that would actually be effective, right? Well, actually, it turns out we not only can, but do. Behold the world's smallest actually working firearms, that I'm aware of, made by Miniature Army, who are in no way, shape, or form affiliated with me or this channel. These pinfire replica guns, as seen on Demolition Ranch, which are still available for purchase as of this writing, fire 2mm steel BBs with enough force to puncture a soda can. Granted, that's at point-blank range, and even then these would most likely be little more than a nuisance, albeit a painful and loud one, to any form of non-insectoid wildlife, let alone any hostile knights. But that's what their scalpel blade swords, ice pick spears, .22 caliber cannons, or 9mm artillery would be for. Also, as one final note, over the course of my research for this video, YouTube actually started recommending some of my own mech tech videos to me. That has nothing to do with anything. I just found it slightly amusing and thought you might too. But yeah, that's pretty much my childhood in a nutshell. Let me know what you think, or if you want to see more on the magical side of the coin in the usual ways and places. And as always, until next time, stay safe, stay sane, and never let life take your imagination from you. Peace.